Fresh start servers, or classic servers of current MMORPGs. Everyone seems to be doing them and people seem to love them, but why? The MMORPG genre is known for long-term progression, constantly expanding storylines, constantly increasing stakes and power. The long-term adventure and consistent character growth was a major selling point of the genre, so why does everyone starts again from the beginning appeal to so many people? When most players are asked about the appeal of fresh start or classic servers for current MMORPGs, most people just say, oh, it's nostalgia. And while I'm absolutely sure nostalgia is a major part of it, it can't specifically be the only thing. What about players that weren't there at the start, that don't have the nostalgia? And is nostalgia enough to convince enfranchised players to lose tens of thousands of hours of progress, or to give up hundreds of potential hours of content from new expansions? What are the true reasons people go to fresh start or classic servers? Let's discuss. Welcome, I'm Josh Drive-Hayes and this is MMOPINION. Today we're talking about the appeal of fresh start servers or classic servers of current MMORPGs. As usual, a massive thank you to all the supporters on Twitch and Patreon who allow me to keep making videos. More information on this at the end. Many major MMORPGs have jumped onto the nostalgia bandwagon and opened up classic servers, instances of the game with all the modern additions removed, letting players relive the experience they had all those years ago when they first joined. The most famous is probably World of Warcraft Classic, but a host of other games have followed suit. Aeon tried, Terra tried, Runes of Magic tried, EverQuest has multiple time-locked progression servers released throughout the year, RuneScape released Old School, which itself was updated enough that they've now had a poll discussing Old School, and even New World, one of the more recent MMORPGs to release, has seen success with its fresh start servers. So I've gone back and played a few fresh start servers or classic servers for current MMORPGs, and I found 8 specific concepts or stages that you go through when you play a fresh start server that really enhance the feeling and make them worth playing. And then I found one major bit of irony related to this entire situation. So let's go back and break them down, starting with why would an enfranchised player willingly throw away tens of thousands of hours of progress on a single character to go back and start all over again? This is point 1. Many players are connected to the game as a whole more than their specific character. While MMORPGs are indeed long games and people put tens of thousands of hours into a specific character, you'll often find the connection any individual player has to a game isn't just to their character. It's to everything around their character, the game's graphics, the game's music, or the general community the game has created. The forums, the Discord chats, the guilds, the clans, the conventions, or the content on YouTube and Twitch. This means starting a fresh start server or a classic server isn't actually starting completely from scratch. It's a new character, yes, with new skills and the leveling experience is still ahead of you, but that's only a small part of the entire game experience. It's still the graphics you know and the music you recognise. It's a control scheme you're familiar with and a user interface you've grown comfortable with. It's the forums you know how to navigate and the community and content you've already been involved with and consumed before. It's the friends you've already made, going back to the moment when you made them. A fresh start or classic server isn't a complete restart. It isn't a foray into the once unknown. It is now a very known concept that you're going back and revisiting, and that nostalgia kick is definitely important. It's closer to replaying a favourite game from your childhood or rewatching a favourite film. You know what's going to happen. It's the process of experiencing it that is enjoyable. It's comforting. But what about the new players that weren't there at the start? Nostalgia isn't relevant to them, so what are they getting? Well, that leads us to the second point. New players can now experience the memories of the old players for themselves. Whenever I review an MMORPG, I always try and find something positive to say, but I will also find negative or critical things. And whenever I say negative or critical things, old-time players often respond with, "It wasn't always like this." They jump to defend their favourite game by telling me how great it used to be. And while they're probably being honest, I have to explain to long-time enfranchised players, new players cannot play through your memories. They have to play the game as it is now. No matter how great it may have been for you, it's not great now. And as great as your old war stories sound, as fascinating as the guild tales you have are, new players can only listen to and pine for the adventure you had. They can't have it themselves. Fresh Start servers or Classic servers, however, do give new players that chance. A Classic server does let a new player visit the memories of an old player because they're going to be able to play the same game, hear the same music, fight the same enemies, travel the same lands. Old players may indeed enjoy the nostalgia because they've been there before, but new players get to experience the game that old players have told them about in the way they remember it. So with old players enjoying nostalgia and new players getting to experience the game they've heard tales of, we come to point 3. The early game is often a more focused gameplay experience with less feature creep and a less convoluted plot. When a game first releases, especially an MMORPG game, it very rarely releases with everything finished. It won't have every skill it will ever have or every dungeon or raid, but it will often release with enough to be substantial. And this reduced amount of content can sometimes result in a more defined experience. The game may have fewer classes, but each class will feel focused on a certain gameplay style. There may be fewer mini-games or mechanical distractions or a simpler UI, and this means that the content that does exist to do feels more important and more substantial. While players may get through it quicker, they will remember it more intensely. Along with less mechanical bloat, you have less plot bloat. The plot and lore of a classic game will often feel much more focused and less convoluted. As an MMORPG grows, the plot gets added to and becomes messy, twisted back and forth. Power creep sets in for the big bad guy of that expansion. Or one of the worst writing mistakes, time travel gets added. The longer a game exists, the more developers need to add both mechanical and then plot devices to make the player feel challenged or relevant, and this very quickly becomes extremely overwhelming. Eventually, after years of feature creep and power creep and parasitic design and systems on top of systems on top of systems on top of bad guys on top of bad guys, it can be comforting to return to a much simpler gameplay loop. Constant power creep is overwhelming, and it's nice to return to a much more basic time. If the player has been tasked with saving the world again and again from a constantly increasing series, a treadmill of godlike beings, each more powerful than the last, eventually you're going to become numb to this treadmill and stop caring about it. All the power in the universe means nothing when you know the next bad guy will be even more powerful, and every system the game tries to get you really excited for is going to lose its edge when you realise that's what every expansion does every time, and it will just be cast away when the next system comes along. It's nice to return to a simpler time when you know that the high-powered bad guy will remain the high-powered bad guy, and the systems you're investing time in will remain relevant. It's hard to get invested in a dangerous plot or character systems when you know they'll be removed and replaced in a few months' time. But a low-level personal plot with simple but relatable systems, that can be engaging without being overwhelming. Saving a village can often feel better than saving the whole world because you can know and care about the people in the village. It's a personal thing. While saving the whole world, that's an impersonal thing. Along with a simpler plot and simpler, more distilled systems comes point 4. Smaller numbers are easier to track and can feel more substantial when you increase them. One of the downsides of power creep is the easiest way to make a player feel powerful is to simply increase a damage number, or to give them more health or more power, and this over time leads to absurd numbers showing up on the screen. I remember when Neverwinter had damage numbers in the tens of millions flashing up all over the screen, and this can become visually and numerically overwhelming. But the start of an MMO is often a different story. You'll have low health, low defense, and do less damage, and this means dealing with smaller numbers, and this actually has a massive advantage, because an increase to a small number is easy to track and relate to, and it feels much more substantial than an increase to a large number. For example, getting a new weapon and going from, say, 10 damage to 12 damage is simple yet pleasing. It's a base number increase that you can track. It's only gone up by 2. But it's also a substantial percentage you can track. You've increased your damage output by 20%, and it's not too overwhelming to see the number 10 go to the number 12. Every single thing about this small increase is relevant and makes sense to you. You can look at every single aspect of it and go, yes, I understand everything that's just happened here, and I can see exactly how much more powerful I have become. But seeing your damage output go from 12,478,397.2 to 12,693,555.4 doesn't have the same impact on our brains, but why? Well, it's because we recognize it as an increase, but we don't know exactly how much it's increased by. We don't know what kind of percent increase it is easily, and because the vast majority of the damage number is the same, starting with 12 million and several 100,000, we don't actually feel the rush of excitement we'd normally get from seeing an increase that we can track. Playing with numbers, both damage or defense or health or amount of enemies that large for such a long time almost numbs you to its power, dulls the thrill that an upgrade is meant to give. This is why getting your first uncommon or rare item on a low-level character often feels so much better than getting your 2000th legendary, because you can see and understand every element of the small upgrade that you got. And with that personal sense of trackable upgrade and achievement, we get to point 5. Fewer cosmetics means visual recognition of the best. With smaller damage numbers and a simpler plot comes the rather nice community aspect of recognizing things. You can recognize the bad guys and the good guys, and if the first dungeon drops a powerful, unique looking weapon, when you see someone with that weapon, you recognize the achievement of that weapon. You know roughly how much damage it does, where it came from, and this knowledge makes you as a player feel accomplished and part of the world. Even if you don't have the item yourself, the act of recognizing it and understanding it still feels like an achievement. You belong in this world because you understand this world. Classic MMOs didn't focus too heavily on cosmetics or payable cosmetic overrides. Often the item you equipped was the visuals that others would see, and this leads to a community understanding the value and the prestige behind the visuals of each item. In older MMORPGs, often without visual overrides, the visual appearance of a character is a story unto itself. It's a tale of the adventures that character has been on, of the quests they've completed, or the bosses they have felled. It's a status symbol when you're seen with a rare or legendary item. If you have it, you know other people can see you with it, and if you see other people with it, you know what they have achieved. It's a moment to be remembered, and early MMORPGs excelled in this. You see something powerful, and you know the person wielding it did something dangerous. When you play a classic server, you're dealing with a far smaller pool of total possible items. And when you play a fresh start server, no one for the first few months is going to have the top level items. And this means far fewer legendaries or noteworthy items are floating around. So getting one and being seen with one, or seeing and recognizing someone else having one, holds greater social impact. And this links to point 6, because if you do have something rare and noteworthy, you will likely be seen, because a smaller landmass means a denser player base. This one's pretty simple. Map size, less landmass. Players are forced into a central city, meaning the community feels alive in-game because it's centralized. As MMORPGs continue to exist, they add expansions, new landmasses, and sometimes they even add what I consider to be a major mistake of MMO design: exclusive, high-level hub cities which serve to split the community, often into early game hub, mid game hub, and end game hub, fracturing where your player base physically is. Classic or fresh start servers not only have less maps, so the community is densely packed, they often have an influx of players, creating a thriving early game experience. And it's the early game experience for the vast majority of new players where the desire to continue playing is created. Starting a brand new MMORPG and knowing that you're going to be playing solo or alone for several days or weeks before you finally get to the good bit isn't a good experience. It's boring, it's lonely. It's the reason that many new players to any MMORPG will quit. Selling your game on the strengths of the social interaction you can have within the game, and then starting with hours, days, or weeks of loneliness before you get to the social interaction bit, is not a good way to retain a player base. It helps to have the social aspect visible from the start if you're going to use that as a major selling point of your genre. And that is exactly what fresh start servers allow the game to do, because every player is at the start. The release of a classic or fresh start server is a beacon of activity. It's an assurance that your early game experience will be social because players haven't spread out yet. As MMORPGs grow and expansions are released, the player base is spread further apart, fragmented and divided among new maps, new dungeons, new raids and new areas. And even if an expansion adds a new hub city and puts everyone there, it leaves vast tracts of game uninhabited. When an MMORPG is released, the content included often serves a purpose. The enemies fill a specific level gap, the weapons and armor matter, the quests usually connect, there's not as much wasted space and nothing has yet been phased out or leveled out. There's almost no forgotten content because it literally just released and someone is going to go and do everything because everything appeals to someone. There are very few forgotten minigames or pointless weapons. No content has yet been feature crept out of relevance. And because a fresh start means everyone starts together, this gives us one of the most important points. Point 7. Anticipation is fun, and the group you can anticipate a fresh start with is everyone. The release of something is not just about release day, it's about all of the build-up to release day, talking with your friends about it, planning your tactics, discussing builds, looking into the plot and the lore and the characters. It's every minute up to the download and then the login queue. Now, when a long-time MMORPG releases a high-level expansion, the pool of people who can get excited about that event and actually get involved is very small. If a new high-level endgame raid is announced, the only people forming groups and getting excited about it are current high-level endgame players of that game, usually people with years invested. They can't bring their friends in. But when an extremely high-level piece of content is announced for an MMORPG game, the pool of people who can get excited about that content or get involved with that content the moment it releases is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. Thousands, tens of thousands if you are lucky. When a brand new fresh start server gets announced, or a classic server gets announced, the amount of people who can get involved, the pool of people to get excited, is in the millions. Everyone who's ever played the game, everyone who ever wanted to play the game, casuals, hardcore, high level, low level, enfranchised, or people who've never been involved with the game at all, can all join on equal footing at the same moment and begin playing the game together. A fresh start server, compared to a high level update, vastly increases the number of people who can get excited to be involved the moment it goes live. This is why companies like the idea of fresh start or classic servers so much. They're not releasing new content to people who already play their game, which is a very small, very niche player base. They're releasing old content to potentially everyone who ever wanted to play the game as it used to be, with everyone starting on a new character. And this leads us to point 8. A fresh start means a new race to the top. As we discussed earlier, a classic or fresh start server doesn't mean you're approaching the game with no knowledge at all. Long-time players will know the meta. They'll know the most efficient method of play, new players will have access to wikis and YouTube videos and training methods. But with everyone at least starting from level 1 and access to information the same for everyone, we get to watch the start of a new race for new world firsts. Some players chase the prestige of epic achievements, the first to max level, the first guild to clear a dungeon or a raid, the first to max a skill. And when that achievement happens, you'll have a small subset of players who were only playing for that, who just stop playing. As an MMO ages, more and more achievements are added, and you get this double-edged sword effect, where the new world firsts are now incredibly tough and appeal only to the hardcore. And the new players who join the game are overwhelmed by the absolute colossal task of finishing everything in the game. An MMORPG is of course a big game, but there is a sweet spot where the average to dedicated player could still look at the content and have a somewhat realistic chance of experiencing it all, or at least attempting to, even if not mastering it. As the game grows, a casual player will look at the mountain of a journey ahead of them and think this isn't even worth starting. This is why so many players are intimidated by Final Fantasy XIV's main storyline quest, or completionists go wide-eyed looking at the trimmed completionist cape on RuneScape, or why many Guild Wars 1 players, especially people starting the game for the first time now, don't even consider going for God walking amongst mere mortals. Achievements are indeed there for the hardcore, and a fresh start server means even the easy achievements are now up for grabs, and everyone thinks on at least some level, that could be me. So now we've got 8 points all discussing the appealing nature of fresh start or classic servers. It's a nostalgic return for old players to a world they've known, or a welcome storied start for the new players to a world they've heard about, with a more focused plot and less bloated gameplay, with fewer parasitic or feature-crept systems, with smaller but more substantial numbers linked to visually significant and recognisable items shown to a more densely packed player base, which you can get excited about and anticipate with everyone, and then compete from a level playing field at the same time for realistic, achievable goals. Now that sounds pretty fun, so what's the irony? Well, the MMORPG genre was focused on long-term progression, and now they've discovered the mass appeal of resetting the game and starting again. Effectively, what they've discovered is the appeal of round 1 ending and round 2 beginning, like a match in Fortnite, or a new game in League of Legends, or replaying your favourite childhood game, or a one-shot Dungeons & Dragons adventure, or watching a TV series which starts well but trails off and just going back to the start when it gets bad. The fresh start or classic server of any MMORPG is often extremely fun, but it's also a sign that the MMORPG designers understand the mass appeal of experiences which end and then start again. It's a sign that most MMORPGs add content that doesn't necessarily improve the core gameplay loop, but just bloats. Experiences are as long as they need to be and shouldn't add more for the sake of adding more, and I find it intensely ironic that the strength of the MMORPG genre is it's a long-term consistent game which people could play forever, yet it's most appealing to both its current and new players when it restarts. But what do you think? Do fresh start or classic servers return to a more refined time before power creep and feature bloat to give a more pure experience of what each game was meant to be with a more densely packed player base? Or are they simply cash grabs for nostalgia, preying on people's rose-tinted memories? Let me know in the comments below. As always, a massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon and Twitch who keep the channel alive. You can support from only £1 a month. Check the video description for links to the Patreon, Twitch, Twitter, and our Discord. And as always, have a great day.